And we are back to talk about some of the stuff in the news right now, which is a couple of things, all George R. R. Martin, A Song of Ice and Fire related.
Carmine, are you a fan of George R. R. Martin and A Song of Ice and Fire?
One of those things.
Whoa. I can't believe you just dissed A Song of Ice and Fire.
I wanted to have this conversation with you and Trey because... And I feel like this is true. I'm sure someone's going to say, oh, no, I wouldn't know. But I feel like out of all the Ice and Fire content creators, I wouldn't say Trey's an Ice and Fire content creator. He loves it and he talks about it with us all the time. But his channel isn't based off that. But I feel like out of all the Game of Thrones, Ice and Fire content creators, I think you're the only person who has gone through all of George's catalog. Like, through the entire thing, all his other stuff. Because for those of you who don't know, George does other things beyond A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones.
Or did other things beyond. I don't know how much he does it anymore, but Trey is a bona fide absolute fan of George R. R. Martin. Mm-hmm. Trey has also read nearly everything that George R. R. Martin has ever written, but that's not his channel. His channel is History Anthropology. I don't know any other content creators that really focus on George's other work. And I understand why. Like, there's no clicks in it. I mean, you can go back to my Thousand Worlds book club, and they're not exactly like hugely popular. But the people that were into them were into them. You know, like obviously a lot of Preston fans are into George R. R. Martin's other works and things like that.
No, 100%. And that's why I can't call myself a George R. R. Martin fan, because I feel like you would have to be such a fan or have gone through his catalog of work. I've only gone through Meat House Man, which I thought was pretty cool. But beyond that, I can't call myself a George R. R. Martin fan.
That's the funny thing is that, like, when the other stuff that you have read of George, you did like. Mm-hmm. But you just haven't bothered to go and like read the rest. You know?
The motivation is not there because there's so much other stuff like we got to get to. But
there's so much media in the world. Yeah,
that's why I can't call myself a George fan. I like George a lot. I love Ice and Fire, but I can't, in good faith, call myself a George R. R. Martin fan if I haven't gone through his entire catalog like you have.
Right. I think you're like a would-be. Like, if you would have read his stuff, you'd be a huge fan, but you just haven't read it.
Let me make this recommendation right now to anyone who doesn't know where to start because he has so much stuff. Meat House Man. Trust me on that one. That one's fucked up, but also kind of crazy in a nice way. It's not very nice. It ends on a very depressing note, but still, Meat House Man, I recommend that one. But, okay, no, so we're going to talk about George's appearance at Bubonicon, which I briefly touched in one of my own videos because of a person who went there. They posted on Reddit, but I found another person who went, and I asked them privately, can you back up what this person posted? Not only did they back up what that guy posted, but they also added way more context. And this is something you guys are not going to see anywhere else. And also,
so you've got some exclusive content from George's appearance at Bubonicon. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what Bubonicon is, and get into what George said that is making you all excited?
Well, I will say,
spoiler, quick, it's not wins. Spoiler, it's not wins. No. Spoiler. Okay, continue.
So I was wrong in my initial video. Excuse me. Bubonicon does not take place in Santa Fe. It takes place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but it's basically New Mexico's longest-running sci-fi and fantasy literary and arts convention. It's essentially what it is. They have it every year. They usually invite some small authors, but I guess George decided to go because he likes having these conversations, clearly. Even though he has nothing new to add, he likes having these conversations.
I mean, it's funny because it's like, okay, I mean... I understand why you thought it was in Santa Fe because you think George and you think Santa Fe. Albuquerque, New Mexico is an hour's drive from Santa Fe, but when you're in the middle of nowhere, it's almost like they're the same city. Like, I understand that, like, on the East Coast, you're like an hour away. Like, come on, like Baltimore and DC are 40 minutes away. We think of them as separate cities, but when you're out in the middle of nowhere, like New Mexico, you kind of think of Albuquerque and Santa Fe as the same place, even though they're literally they're an hour away. It's a fairly big distance, but yeah.
The other thing I want to add to this context is that Dragon Demands also asked Elio about those posts on Reddit from that guy, And this is what Elio said. Elio, of course, has worked with George before. He's the original superfan. Elio said on his website, in regards to what George said about House of the Dragon and the whole thing, George said something similar to me over a lunch a couple weeks ago, that he was considering a post and not a blog about the season, and that was contextualized in things broadly similar to what he has said to have told people at Bubonicon. So Elio is confirming that what that guy said, that George said, seems to be legit. So I just want to make that very clear. And again, the person that I spoke to privately also backed up that post and added more context to it, which again...
That George will be doing a not a blog post fairly soon on his thoughts about season 2, or at least he was thinking about doing.
Which from what we can gather, he was not too big of a fan.
Oh, because your position was, we don't know. George has been relatively polite in the past. Like, for instance, George said nothing about the later seasons of Game of Thrones.
Well, he liked the first half of season 2. That we know for a fact.
No, that we know is a fact. Yes,
so the second half, apparently he had some issues. Which, okay. So again, I messaged this guy privately, and this is what the guy told me. Winds of Winter is not done. He's still working on it and planning to finish. A big part of the problem is that he keeps getting distracted by other things. He said he needs long stretches of uninterrupted work, as in days/weeks, not hours, to make progress, but he keeps getting pulled away. This is something you said 2 weeks ago to me when we did a podcast, which is a Patreon exclusive. Check it out, guys. About how George's issue is that he needs another pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he needs a pandemic, and he needs a deadline and motivation. I will say that knowing the timeline, and I'm eventually going to do a video on this, but like knowing the timeline of George, he needs to sit down, have no other distractions. And then he needs something to work for, a deadline. So, for instance, Dance with Dragons, a good third of that book was written knowing that the premiere of Game of Thrones was coming, and he wanted his book to sell along with the premiere.
Yep.
He had that deadline, and he worked his ass off, and it came out great. And the stuff that he wrote during that year was fantastic. And so he also describes the pandemic as being a great period where he again wrote, something like 400 to 500 pages of wins, maybe a third of it. But that's because he had no distractions. So he either needs like a goal, or he needs no distractions around him. The problem is he has no real goal right now to work towards. You could say, okay, maybe the Dunkin' Eggs premiere or House of the Dragons premiere, but that's for maybe, but it's hard. It's his first big show, Game of Thrones, its premiere for season 1 is a lot different than his second big show on its third season, or his third big show on its first season, Like, there's a huge difference. It's just not the same, and so, yeah, he has all these projects going on. He has Dunkin' Egg and House of the Dragon and Bills and whatever, his empire of money and, agents and lawyers and whoever in his life. It's just, not to mention, whatever's going on in his personal life. And we all have things going on in their personal lives. So, there's that.
This next one here is the reason why I tweeted at him, "Hope you're feeling well, George," because most recently he put something on Twitter about the AMC show Dark Winds, because I know he's passionate about that. And this one here made me feel pretty sad for him. He's been really stressed and overwhelmed about all the stuff that people expect from him and all the things he needs to do. He seemed like he really needed a hug. He listed a bunch of projects, including Winds of Winter, Blood and Fire, the Fire and Blood sequel, a dozen more Dunkin' Egg stories, all the A Song of Ice and Fire TV adaptations, other adaptations like Dark Winds and In the Lost Lands, the short films he's working on, and editing Wildcards. So, again, it's one of those situations. I hate to say this because it comes from DJ Khaled, but he's suffering from success. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And Yeah, he's bitten off a lot more than he can chew. And I think a lot of this has to do with like when things are interesting. Things are interesting at the beginning. Everyone knows that. You know, when a relationship's the most exciting? At the beginning. You know, when is that great new idea exciting? Like we know at Carmine with like our video ideas, right? You come up with a video idea and you're like, this is going to be great. And that idea is so energizing. You sit down, you write a script. You know, okay, you're still doing okay. Then you begin like recording and then, well, this is work. And then you start getting tired and then you're like, oh God, I got to start doing editing. And then sometimes who knows if that video gets finished? Like we're all there, you know, all of us, no matter what you do, you know, you've been there, whether you're a writer or an artist or, you know, just anybody describing what you do at work. Like when you start, you're all excited about it. And then you get into it and you're like, oh, this is a lot of monotonous like labor to actually get to a completion. And so, yeah, I mean, all of each and every one of those things, like I understand why they're emotionally significant to him. Like I understand like Dark Wings, like, you know, his connection to Santa Fe and the community and, you know, the American Indian population there and how he feels about, you know, New Mexico and race and all sorts of things. I understand that he wants to do that and be part of that, you know, and he really likes it. I understand like his short movies about, you know, these are the Howard Waldrop kind of films. And like, this is his like mentor and he wants to like, you know, make sure that people remember him. And then, you know, wild cards is again, like his group of friends that he has known, like keep in mind, he doesn't have children. So his friends are more important. Like you and I, we talk about friends. Yeah. Maybe we have some good friends. They're not as important as our family. Right. So like, and you don't even have children, but like, you know, like when you don't, when, you know, everyone has like this emotional connection inside them that they're going to attach to certain people. Okay. George R. R. Martin has been friends with people, like good friends with people for literally 50 years, like literally 50 years. He talks to people, you know, on a fairly frequent basis and he has this network. Okay. And Wildcards is that. He is promoting his friends. He's giving his friends the ability to like put out their art and he likes it. You know, I understand why he'd want to be part of it and edit it. You know, he stopped writing for it a long, long time ago, but, and he hasn't edited a Wildcards book in a while, but still producing it, you know, signing contracts related to it to put his name on the cover, you know, that kind of stuff you know, not to mention like, oh Jesus, Fire and Blood, which is, you know, right now, Blood and Fire, whatever and that's the moneymaker. That's the moneymaker right now because all of the different shows right now are based on that. You know, and then you got Dunk and Egg and House of the Dragon, all of this. And way at the bottom of that pile, Winds of Winter, you know. So it's a lot. It's, you know, it's hard to even relate to it. I'm trying to like get people to put yourself in George R. R. Martin's shoes. Okay. You don't have the same sort of family that the rest of us do. You don't have the same like 9 to 5, but instead you have all of this money and all of the headaches that all of the moving parts of having a huge amount of money. But a lot of people think that like money makes things easier. And in some ways it does, but it's also a headache. You know, if you hire a money manager, you now have to supervise that money manager. Like, you know, and that's a pain because you don't know anything about money managing. Like anybody that's like hired a plumber or hired someone to like trim a tree or hired anything, you know, I have to in some way supervise this person or they're going to take me to the cleaners. You know, so now you've got this empire of agents and lawyers and people that take care of his compound and all sorts of stuff.
I don't want to be very insulting, but I feel like the only people who could really understand what George is going through are people who are older, much older like he is, and successful and have found success in their older life. Because this seems to me like it's a younger man's game. Like having to deal with all of this stuff would probably be easier if he was in his 20s or 30s.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a medium man's game, because I think there a lot you need the
That's
wisdom
true, actually, yeah.
to handle it. Because if you're in your 20s and 30s, you know fuck all. So it's like if he were 55 or even 65 in his situation, he might be able to handle all of that. And I'm not talking just about the writing. I'm talking about life, like life. Just think about how much more complicated George's life is now than it was, say, when he put out A Dance with Dragons, right? Like people think, oh, all he's got to do is sit down and write. Well, you know, he also has whatever $200 million to handle. He also has like all of these projects now that he didn't have. He has all these people harassing him, all of these, agents and producers and everything. So, I feel for him, man. I feel for him. We all get busy and we all get exhausted, but that's him all the time.
He is doing stuff to help himself out. In the next portion here, the person who was talking to me said, George said he's sure people on the internet would be very upset that he took a long trip to Europe while he had so much work to do, but that he needed a vacation, and he's really glad he went. He said he's not going to put his life on hold and not do anything but work on wins, which, honestly, that's fair. That's fair. I do like this next one here, because this is actually something you and I talked about last year. During the trip to Europe, he visited Tolkien's grave and saw that people were leaving him flowers, gifts, and letters even long after he was dead. He said something like, and I'm quoting, "If I make the right choices with my own work, I might be remembered like that. If I make the wrong choices, I might be forgotten." It seemed like the experience made him think a lot about what he wants to do about his own mess of projects, but he never arrived at a conclusion or a final decision. So this is something you and I discussed last year about the Mount Rushmore of fantasy writers, and how I would personally not put George on that as much as I would want to, because you don't get a placement if you don't finish. And I hate that I'm saying that, but it's fucking true. He had 14 years to put this out, and something happened along the way. Now, you and I may have figured out what's been happening lately with him, something private that he hasn't revealed yet, and we won't reveal it either, at least not until it happens, but I would say that thing has been going on for maybe the past 4 to 5 years. What was going on before that?
Yeah.
What happened to the 9 to 10 years where he should have been working on it and putting it out? Realistically, in a better world, in a nice alternate universe, as of right now, we should be complaining about Dream of Spring being late or covering it because he released it a while back. But, well, here we are on another wins video. Again, I love George. I love the books he created. And I'm glad he's living his life, regardless of how many people on social media keep pestering him. And honestly, I said it in a previous video. I'd be happy for him if he decided to retire tomorrow and live out the rest of his life, seeing the world, hanging out with his loved ones, and all that stuff. But at this point, I'm kind of just tired of all this, him telling us that he's sorry, he's late, but it's like, yeah, man, I get it, but either shit or get off the pot. Do something.
Well, I mean, again, I think like managing his life is what he's doing. It's really, really hard. When you procrastinate, you always come up with excuses. Like when I need to do something, all of a sudden I'm like, but the lawn needs mowing. And then all of a sudden the lawn gets mowed. You find some other project to do. So George has infinite projects to distract him from the Winds of Winter. But it's interesting that he brings up the Tolkien grave thing, because it's such an important part of his work. It's actually not how I see my life or mortality anymore, but I understand it to someone that doesn't have children. People, they start thinking about their legacy. His book, The Armageddon Rag, was a lot about the immortality of music. Like when Jimi Hendrix creates a song, in a way, Jimi Hendrix is living forever. So the song is kind of his ghost, right? And so he talks about this in Ice and Fire and a lot. And, when you go to Tolkien's grave and he's thinking, his legacy, how am I going to be remembered, and stuff like that. I personally don't think about that. At least I don't anymore. And maybe it's because I've like most of us, we've come to terms with the fact that like we won't really have very much of a legacy. Like we're going to be forgotten pretty fucking quick. But even these people that are super important, say you're an Alexander the Great, cosmologically, you're also going to be fucking forgotten. Like, don't worry about it. Like, it doesn't. And so my personal way of seeing things is like knowing the amount of joy I've had at certain experiences. For instance, looking at like holding my baby or something. Like if you asked me, would you rather live forever or have that experience of holding my baby and dying? I'd be like, I'd rather have the experience of holding my baby and dying. And that's the trade-off, right? Like there's so many good things that come with mortality that I'm very happy to be mortal, and I'm very happy that I'll die because that's the deal. But if you don't do that, if it's not part of you, then you may view like life and legacy and all that very differently. So I don't know, I understand where George is coming from. It's in a lot of his writing. It's been in his writing for a long time, for decades. Armageddon Rag was early 80s. And he's writing about the same thing that he's thinking about while sitting in front of Tolkien's grave, like what his legacy is. And yeah, you're right. Like, is George's legacy going to be tarnished by the fact that he didn't finish his books? Of course. And you can say, well, okay, a lot of famous writers never finished their books. Like, look at Frank Herbert. But Frank Herbert, one, Dune by itself is a fairly self-contained story that people kind of focus on without the rest of the series. And two, his son has been working his butt off at promoting him, just like Tolkien's children worked their butt off at promoting him. Just like Alec. And if you've ever seen the Hamilton musical, you kind of know about like Hamilton's widow spending the rest of her fucking life repairing Hamilton's legacy so people remembered him fondly rather than being a fuck up. And so you got to remember like the work of Christopher Tolkien and Brian Herbert and Hamilton's widow, Schuyler, that's really important and significant. And so unless somebody's going to do that for George, I mean, maybe Elio will, but somebody has to do that for George if George is really just going to be remembered. I don't think he's going to be remembered on his own.
I want to push back on the legacy thing regarding Frank Herbert and Lord of the Rings with Tolkien. Some fans would argue that Frank Herbert's son, Brian Herbert, is kind of tarnishing Frank's legacy by releasing 37 sequels to Dune. He's kind of milking it right now. There's not exaggeration. And also, while Christopher Tolkien,
I'm not saying there's not selfish interest in that, but at the same time, like what he did certainly has put Frank Herbert's back in the mind of society's zeitgeist. Like, but
for good or for bad, like, that's the real question.
I don't know. I don't know. People are still talking about it. These movies. I mean, Brian Herbert's the one. Like Timothée Chalamet's like Dune. It's not like that would be out without Brian Herbert. Somebody else would be managing it, or it wouldn't get made, or whatever. Like these sorts of things, require human beings to push them.
I see what you're saying. And the next thing here that he was saying is he talked about visiting the Dunk and Egg TV set and how much he enjoyed that experience. He gave a long history about his work in TV, the gist being that he loves working on the shows and having his stuff adapted. He also enjoys meeting and working with other people instead of just sitting alone in his office. He loves to see something he imagined come to life in the real world. He repeatedly mentioned how it felt like he was really in Ashford Meadow while visiting the set, but also that there are elements of TV that are really hard for him, having his shows canceled or not picked up after he puts a lot of work into them. This was that TV show on Sci-Fi Channel, right?
Well, you're confusing it a bit because so you're talking about Doorways. Doorways was not going to be on Sci-Fi Channel, but you think it's sci-fi because eventually Sliders was on Sci-Fi Channel.
No. The ship. The story about the ship.
Oh, Night Flyer.
Yeah.
Night Flyers.
Wasn't that on Sci-Fi Channel? Then it get canceled.
It was canceled the first season. I don't know how much George had no involvement in. And so he was quite surprised. He did do one interview for it, but he was quite surprised that it happened. Because Night Flyers was different so George R. Martin sold all of his creative property to HBO, and he has a certain contract with HBO on everything that he did except for the stuff that he already sold. So he forgot that he'd already sold Night Flyers to somebody else, and the rights passed on and on and on. And so Night Flyers was produced because he didn't own it anymore. He didn't own the rights anymore. And HBO didn't own them. So, whatever clauses that are with HBO, like, I think they involve George has to be given producer credit and given some degree of creative control and that kind of stuff. I don't know how much creative control, but he has some degree of creative control, Well, I don't think Night Flyers, he had any of that. But I don't know. I don't know if he was depressed about Night Flyers getting canceled. That's probably on the bottom of his list, Night Flyers. I mean, it was fine. It was fine. It was fine.
To continue on the trip, he talked to the actor who plays Hodor. Apparently, the actor wrote an autobiography about what it's like to be a gay giant living in Scotland and his experience working on the show. George R. Martin slid in and said, "My book is 12 years late, and he wrote one over the summer." Yeah, we discussed this briefly in regards to George and how lately there's been a lot of people who have been coming out with their own books. For example, Sapkowski from the Witcher series writing another Witcher book. And it took him 2 years to do so, specifically, because he even said 2 years ago, I started writing one, and now it's about to be released.
But there's writing and there's writing. I mean, George R. R. Martin's writing, like... So having like now done the fanfic and like been really analyzing George R. R. Martin's words and how he constructs sentences and everything, like I do appreciate what he does a lot more and realize how difficult it is, because it's there's an old saying, Carmine, I wrote you an 8-page letter. If I had more time, it would have been one. Okay, and it's very true that George R. R. Martin's writing, the final product that you get is, despite people talking about like, how much time is wasted on characters meandering, it's very efficient. It's very efficient, beautiful writing. It's not just some sort of stream of consciousness that Stephen King spits out. And keep in mind, Stephen King, considering that he's just writing it, it's incredible. Stephen King's writing is incredible considering how little time Stephen King puts into it. I'm very impressed with Stephen King, but George R. R. Martin's writing it's just a different quality. It's just a different quality than others. Like I opened up like J.K. Rowling's like books, and I was just like, wow, every sentence begins with Harry. Like every sentence. But while you like look at George's writing and you're like, huh. Like every sentence begins with something different, and he only mentions the protagonist's name once or maybe twice in a paragraph. And like how much time it takes to readjust your sentences in a way that's not even noticeable, that you're only saying the character's name once in a paragraph, is incredible. It's really something. When I analyze like his writing, it's very, very good, and it would take a long time to craft, and it does take a long time to craft. So like, is Hodor's book, which by the way was probably written by a ghost writer or consultant, is it going to be on the level of Ice and Fire writing? I doubt it. Come on.
I didn't know that. I didn't know he was gay. Or from Scotland. I didn't know anything like that, but I find it funny.
George R. R. Martin?
I forgot the actor.
The Hodor actor. I forgot
his name.
Yeah, no, I did know that. I did know that he was gay, but I just, it wasn't that important, so I just didn't think about it. But yeah, his name is Christian Narn.
That sounds about right.
Or Christian Narn. However one pronounces it in an Irish way, but Nairn, Christian Nairn. I don't know how to do it. I don't know.
You're making a lot of enemies in my comment section now. Jesus. So, and to wrap this up, he mentions how a lot of his friends have died lately. He did say he was very aware that he was 75, but also that he doesn't expect to die anytime soon because he was healthy. In sum, he's really bummed out about Winds of Winter not being done. He seemed pretty down at times and joked that he was using us for free therapy. I really thought he was building to some kind of declaration, but at the end, he just said, and I'm quoting, "This is a speech with no conclusion. because he hasn't decided what to do. And that's the end of the DMs. I'm going to be very real with you. I'm actually quite surprised that George was super open and very real with these people. I'm assuming it was probably a small audience of people, maybe like 10 to 20, probably a bit more, because I've never heard of Bubonicon before, like this popped up. So, but yeah, no, I'm a little surprised that he was so, excuse me, I'm a little surprised that he was so open and real with these people, and I'm glad he was, because this was pretty enlightening, knowing that he cares about his legacy, knowing that he actively wants to finish and continue these stories, that he's not bored or sick of it. I covered this in the last video regarding this topic. It's good to know this stuff, and I hope in the future he has more of these candid conversations.
I mean, so I'll say this about George in general. George is... Sometimes people get angry that George doesn't say something, and that's because George is a pretty straightforward, honest guy. And I think one of the reasons why his writing connects with people is it's very straightforward and honest. He's willing to put forward his vulnerable self, his embarrassing self, and people connect with that, you know? And that's how he speaks as well. In life, that he offers himself up more than the rest of us would, you know, and so yeah, like he admit, like how often do the rest of us like admit that we're depressed to people, you know, or a crowd, an audience, like, oh yeah, no, I'm really feeling down, you know, like how many of us do that? We go, no, our day's fine. Maybe we're going to tell a friend or our significant other that we're depressed, but the rest of us, you know, we kind of keep that stuff to ourselves. We're not honest. And George is very honest. And when he tries to keep like information from people about his books, he tries to stay silent or whatever. So yeah, it's in his personality, and it shows in his writing. His writing is very emotional and forthcoming about the most painful and embarrassing experiences and painful and embarrassing thoughts. So, and plus, like, George has always been depressed. He's always been a depressed guy. He's a writer, for God's sakes.
By the way, in the original post from the other person, the guy said how George hinted that there may have been disagreements between him and the House of the Dragon showrunners, specifically quoting George by saying, "Season 1 was great. Season 2, I need to make a blog post about." So we're, as of recording this on August 29th, we're still waiting for that blog post, because George did recently put a blog post out in support of Peter Dinklage's new film, The Thicket. So that's cool.
It was very important. That was very important. The here's the thing about like the disagreements. I don't think there are going to be some like tangible disagreements that one can, like, I don't think one can have a simple, tangible disagreement about the ending of House of the Dragon. I think I think House of the Dragon season 8 failed near the end on reasons that are complicated and have many reasons to them. Like, this is very different than, say, how I felt Barry ended, okay? Barry ended badly and horribly, so horribly that I now, like, can't watch anything with Bill Hader in it, because I just, like, I don't, like, trust his creative thoughts anymore. Oh, yeah, it's, like, that bad. Like, I hated the end of Barry so much. But I can tell you quite clearly, like, why I thought the end of Barry was bad, and it was simply, you know, putting the Fonz in jail at the end, like, didn't make any sense and was stupid and betrayed like every character arc and every character motivation. What was the fucking guy's name?
Cousineau?
Do you remember? Rousseau.
Close enough. Yeah,
putting Rousseau in jail at the end was the dumbest move ever. And it's very simple, like, why Barry falls apart. Like, that was the worst choice you could have made. Do I have any complaints about direction or acting or scripts or dialogue? Not really. Not really. It was just one single, like, plot choice that I can point to and I can be like, that made the show absolutely suck. Like, it was so bad. Having Rhaenys bash through the floor at the end of season 1, yeah, that's a silly scene. but it doesn't ruin anything like in a strong sense.
You're getting to Alicent's and Daemon at the very end. Look, at the very end of season 2.
Sure. Even if I'm talking about how bad Alicent and Rhaenyra's discussion is at the end of the season, there's a lot of things I understand about why that was there. Like, I understand why they failed. Like, they're like, oh God, we need to end the season with those two meeting. Well, what are we going to have? What are we going to have them talk about? Well, I don't know. Alicent hasn't done anything all season, but she's a main character. So we need to invent something. Oh God. So like, I kind of feel for them on like how hard of a situation they were in. Cause again, the source material for House of the Dragon isn't great. And it's just impossible to adapt. You establish 3 characters as the main characters and then give them nothing to do. Like, it's just the plot and how the structure of the show and everything is just so difficult to adapt in the first place. And it just really comes out there. So imagine you're George. Like, what would you say, like, in a simple sense on like why season 8 fell apart? I think there's a lot of things, right? Like, what they're doing with prophecy and not understanding the importance of free will and George R. R. Martin's narrative, and like having these main characters not doing anything and not building to a climax, and HBO coming in and ruining things by cutting off 2 episodes. And, there's so many little reasons that lead to the end. It's not as simple as Barry, like, where that just fucking was a horrible decision and you fucking ruined everything. There's just a lot of little things, some bigger things, but a lot of little things, So I don't know if George, and it's the kind of thing where it's like, could you imagine George like being like talking to someone and being like, you don't do this, and someone being like, we're gonna do it. Oh, we had a falling out. I just couldn't imagine that situation either.
If anything, George is probably going to be very polite about his disagreements in regards to season 2. He's going to be very polite. People are expecting like this like major thing where he's gonna join the mob and he's gonna bash everybody. I saw someone on Twitter, their tweet got to like over 1 million people saw it, about how they're like, this is my most anticipated George R. R. Martin thing since Winds of Winter. Really? I mean, I'm anticipating it because I'm going to cover it.
Direct me to the George R. R. Martin post or interview or convention appearance where he trashed season 8. Like, direct me to that.
Well, to be fair, he did do that incredibly long Here Be Dragons post where he goes on this long tangent.
That's so minor and petty.
It's so minor and petty, but people are looking for it.
Who is sitting there caring that much about the fucking arms on dragons? Like, who? Who's caring that much about the fucking a lack of violet eyes, and stuff like that?
I'll be real with you. I'm waiting for him to disagree with the Daemon vision of the White Walkers. I'm really waiting for that, because that was so bad, and nothing anyone can say is gonna make me think otherwise. And I think you're on the same page with me. Like, I want George to come out and like just say shit against it, because it was so bad. And I don't think he's going.
He's not going to. He's not going to.
We'll see.
He's not going to.
We'll see what he says. No. I don't expect him to bash Ryan Condal or Sarah Hess. I don't expect that, but I expect him to be very polite about his disagreements. And
he's going to the closest he's going to get is sometimes there are certain creative decisions I would have done differently, or there are certain character arcs I would have done differently. Like, that's it. That's the closest you're going to get to an insult.
Yeah.
Is him saying, maybe there are certain choices that I would, like, that's it.